Did we figure that out in the personality class? Come on. All right. Everybody ready? Yes. Okay, gotta know. What are your names? Oh, we're so okay. Who has words of affirmation as their love language? Is that A? Oh, okay. What's the code? Oh, shit, sorry, I didn't show you the code. Oh, there's before. I got so excited we were done. Okay. And you saw the whole skull. A was word of affirmation. B is quality time. Oh, yeah. Okay. How many had B? Yes. Okay. C is receiving gifts. 0. D is acts of service. And E is physical touch. Oh, E is touch. Okay. So, 2 things about that particular quiz. There are lots of great quizzes online to go through your love language a little more extensively. The 2 things that I've noticed giving this particular quiz a lot is that no one has receiving gifts because you look incredibly shallow if you picked all of the answers that are receiving gifts. So nobody wants to pick them because when it's placed against like spend time with your children, receive a gift. You're like, it doesn't quite jive with most people, so no one ever picks it. But the reality is that there are a lot of people that like to receive gifts, and there are some pieces about it. Quality time tends to get a lot, and acts of service also tend to get a lot from this type of population because teachers tend to value those things. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. Understanding your love language is just a nice tool to help you with relationships. I mean, it helps you with your romantic relationships and partnerships. It helps you with your children. It helps you with your family. And it can help you with your mother-in-law. You know, there's a lot of ways that you can kind of read people that maybe you sometimes feel disconnected from. And you can see why maybe there's that disconnect. And with students, of course, it's also nice because you're able to read them a little bit better. And you're able to know when maybe you feel like, boy, that kid doesn't appreciate what I valued. You know, what I took so much time to do for this class, you did it because you felt that it was really valuable, but you may have done that because that's just the way you see the world and what you value, and that kid might just not think that that's that valuable. Not because they don't like you, but because that's not their language. So those are the 5 we talked about. But a more fun way to talk about them in terms of tacos. Oh, tacos. Tacos. National Taco Day. Perfect, yes, it's Taco Day too. So, words of affirmation. Your tacos are delicious, right? Needed. Saying words about those tacos. Needed. Words of affirmation. Acts of service. I made you tacos. More accurately, though, acts of service would be let's make tacos. As opposed to I make tacos. Receiving gifts, here's a taco. Quality time, let's go out for tacos together. And physical touch, let me hold you like a taco. Take that one how you will. You can cuddle with it, eating tacos. Words of affirmation. Teachers are very good at words of affirmation. That's a huge part of your classroom. You talk to the kids. You talk to the people around you. You organize your day through, let's go, let's move along, it's time to do this, where are we at? Good job. You're providing a lot of feedback through your words. So words of affirmation is just something that teachers are generally and naturally pretty good at. We're going to go through 3 forms of words of affirmation and ways that you can provide feedback through your words. But specifically, words of affection can be valuable for them. People like when you notice things about them, the physical appearance, but also just more internally. You can always talk to them, about, oh, that dress is cute, but you can really make sure that it's something about their being, and that's a word of affection. Okay. Words of fast because we have 5 to get through and we have 30 minutes. So if you guys have specific questions about it, you can ask at the end, but I know I'm going really fast. For those of you that are like, oh, I haven't even read the slide, you know. It's just because I want to make sure I get through all 5, and there is quite a bit of information. Words of praise, like I said, this is the one that we think we often do really well, and we do. We tend to really give a lot of praise in the classroom, but to specifically be words of affirmation, you're more directly noticing something about an individual kid or about the classroom as a whole, and you're taking a unique take on it that you normally wouldn't do, like the good job piece. It's more like you worked really hard, or you tried your best, or I know that you've missed the last couple, and this time you got it right. You know, really recognizing something more specific about them or the classroom. Words of encouragement. This is something that kids that have this love language, they really latch onto, especially when they're struggling. You might not always think to do this, right? Because it's not necessarily part of your traditional day to really be encouraging about, like, you're almost there, or I can see that this is hard for you, and I know you can do it, let's keep going. That's something that a kid like this would really value. Gentle startup, I always include this when I talk to preschool teachers and just educators in general, because I think sometimes we just forget that, you know, we're talking all the time, and some days the way we communicate can be a little more harsh than others. It's no reflection on who you are. That's just human nature, right? Like, some days we have better days, and some days we have days where we maybe just want to go home. And so on those days, we tend to not have that gentle startup, and recognizing and remembering that can be really valuable in the classroom when you sense you're a little off. And I mean, I even notice it sometimes in therapy when I sense I'm just a little bit off, but I'm not quite able to communicate things as well as I want to. I think about how I'm approaching the conversation. And these are some good questions to ask yourself and think about. I know these are probably hard to read because I'm from the back. So, what need is my child communicating? So, what are they trying to get from me? You know, that's something that can be really important, because especially when a child approaches you in a way that you're not expecting, or a child who typically doesn't approach you, what are they wanting to get out of that? Is my response helpful and kind? And is my response about the child or myself? This is probably the biggest one, because a lot of times in the classroom, we have an agenda. I mean, our day is full, the time is full, you need to work with all of the kids in the classroom, and your agenda might not be serving what that child is wanting to talk to you about at that exact moment. But recognizing that sometimes, in that way of like, okay, so what do you need? You know, and you're asking them, what do you need? But you're really saying, if I give you something, can we move on? Right? Right? Yeah, because that's what you want to do. Like, if I pay this attention to you now, can we move on? And I think that's probably the most important part of this. Are my expectations appropriate for the child? We forget that kids don't know how to communicate at these ages. We just assume they can talk about things as well as we can, because a lot of times they can, right? There are a lot of subjects that they can talk to you about, that they can speak really well on. But when they're stressed, or when there's something that's really troubling them, or when there's something that they really just don't understand how to present, there's confusion, it takes them a lot longer, and it's a lot harder for them to find the words. Sometimes this manifests in other ways. It can be physically, it can just be that they're really tugging at you. There are a lot of ways that this can come up, and recognizing that maybe that's not typical for them, and they want to tell you something or want to get some connection from you. There's this thing going around that says, we shouldn't call it attention seeking, we should call it connection seeking. And I was like, well, maybe that is kind of true. Attention doesn't have to be a bad word, right? It's kind of the point of that. It's like saying that you want attention isn't necessarily a negative thing. We all want attention. And reframing that to we want connection is a nice way to think about kids, because that is what they want. They want you to connect with them, and they want you to consistently connect with them. I love you, I care about you, you're valuable, I hear you, I see you. That all stands them they deserve that, right? And I think most educators know that. Most people who see or work with kids recognize that. Kids are valuable just because they're there. They're important. And making sure that they recognize that comes up in all of the love languages like I was talking about before. So now we're going to go through each of the love languages individually. Quality time. Quality time really makes sure that they have your undivided attention. And it doesn't just have to be your undivided attention. It could be peers' undivided attention. They just want to make sure that someone is able to put some space and energy into them and no one else. And a lot of times kids that want quality time, and they kind of become like the class clown or the center of the class. And as they're doing that, they get really frustrated with transitions back to engaged schoolwork because they love that people are paying attention to them. So they often have that difficult time going back to, okay, it's not about me anymore, fine, I'll do my stuff. And recognizing that and being able to name that, hey, you know, you guys can finish your story when you play in 20 minutes or whatever. Like being able to give them that outcome that I know that this is what you want and you can do it again after you get your work done can sometimes help a child that really values quality time. I'll talk to you later. Quality conversation, like I was saying. Tell me about this. They don't just want the good job, the words of affirmation. They want that secondary piece of, let's talk about how you did a great job. And you probably know that in your life. I mean, there's all sorts of people that have this. Like, you'll mention, hey, you did a great job at, when you ran that race. And they're like, oh, yeah, okay. Like, you open the door for them to explain the race, right? Like, yeah, it was tough at first, I was so tired that morning, and you're like, oh, I just said good job. I didn't know this was turning into a half-an-hour conversation about your race. But they're like, they have interest. I want them to know all the details. So being able to recognize that that's a quality time directive. Storytelling. Again, this is a nice way for kids that really value this to be able to be heard. One tool that I found that's kind of a unique one that's more of a recall way to do it is if you have a basket that the most inexpensive way is with rocks, where you paint different faces on rocks. Like you have like a happy face, a silly face, different faces, and then the kids can each pull out a rock, or they can do 2 or 3 rocks, and then they tell a story, and their character has to do what their rock does. So if their rock is silly, then the fox was so silly because he started playing with a hula hoop. And that is the way that they incorporate an emotional stance as part of the story. There's lots of ways, but it's just an easy one. Receiving gifts. Like we were talking about, this doesn't mean you're a narcissist, okay? People that like gifts, you're not an egomaniac. You enjoy people thinking about you and presenting that to you. And being able to show you that through some way that they've actually have a tangible item that they're giving you. Often it just represents an important aspect of your life too. It's not necessarily the monetary value. It sometimes could be the monetary value, but there are ways that people show that they care through gifts, right? Like this is something that we know from our lives. Like I had a client who, I said, what'd you get for Christmas? She told me a blender. I was like, gosh, isn't that like the worst traditional gift from your spouse? Like, isn't that like the joke on every TV sitcom since the 70s? It's like, you don't get a blender. Well, she really wanted this blender, and this was like really important to her. It was a Ninja, I know.
Oh, I was going to say,
I don't know if it's a Ninja.
Something expensive.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, we have to assume it was an expensive blender because what else would you want? But anyway, no, she really wanted this blender. And to her husband took the time to get it. So that made it really important to her. And that's the nature of the gift giving piece. Another good example is there's a commercial, it's kind of older now, with Extra Gum, I think, where it's the wrappers, and the dad makes cranes out of all these wrappers. And then the girl goes to college and she has the big box of all the cranes for dads that were giving her. So it really pulls at your heartstrings with that gum. And it's nice, you know, I mean, it is a manifestation of gift giving that is valuable, and that she kept all those over the years. So, gifts are not provided as a payment for services. That's not valuable, right? Like if somebody's getting it because they gave you something, kind of like a lot of schools, not maybe, kind of maybe at the older ages, where they provide a reward for something they did well. Or like if you get 3 chips, you get something out of the box. That's not really this type of gift giving. Gifts that are given and with the expectation of immense gratitude. Oh, I'm so thankful for that blender. Oh, it's done so much for me. There are some people that want that because words of affirmation becomes their love language, and they find it valuable when someone praises them for giving that gift they put time and energy into. Well, that takes away from the gift for the person receiving it. They feel like they then have to go out and, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. And even little kids can recognize that sometimes, as, you know, like if they feel like, oh, thank you for letting us have that extra time. If you just give them the feedback, you guys earned it, or whatever. They might not feel like they have to provide you that type of feedback. Gifts don't take the place of providing services or caring for a child. You won't get away with that in your positions. But in life, that's something that's to think about. And gifts without connection are not as important and valuable as the ones that have meaning. But people that like to receive gifts, they still will find a gift valuable if it doesn't have that type of a meaning. But gifts with meaning just tend to hold more weight anyway. Physical touch. So, this one always gets like a weird response for the school piece, right? Because it's just funny. Like, how do you do it in the classroom? And then some people just avoid it altogether. And then some people are like, oh, no, you know, I do X, Y, and Z with my kids in my classroom. And I do think it's one of those that you have to have a balance. And the other thing that I name a lot when I do talks on talking with parents, I say that one of the best ways to approach this, and I do it with parents in therapy, is I will tell them from the get-go in our intake session, there are going to be times that I might touch your child. I might come up behind them. Hi, can I touch you? Okay, with my hand on their shoulder, I might actually physically kind of move them around, help them with, like, we do a lot of like yoga stuff, and I have them lay on the ground. So that's a little more in depth than maybe what you would be doing, but to name for parents that, you know, there might be times when I do touch your child and hug them, and you need to trust that I want to be appropriate with them, and I'm going to create good boundaries and teach them what's appropriate. You know, there are appropriate ways to touch other people. And culturally, we have a little bit bigger bubble than a lot of other cultures do, generally. But there are kids and people that really value the physical touch aspect of life, and they do feel most connected when they sense that you've been able to connect with them through touch. So, setting limits around it. Skin to skin is an important part of touch. One of the ways that can be done is there's on Facebook, there's a classroom that has like a fist bump, high five, or hug, and the kid comes in and they pick which one they want. And that's just a really nice way for the teacher to start the day. It's a great ritual. It allows for the touch piece. It gives the kid the power to choose what they want to do. And it starts out the day in a positive space for everybody. Some kids just really don't like touching. And that's why that system is nice too, because they can just pick fist bump and like go away. You know, they don't have to sit there and touch you. So for them, that's the easiest way to do it. Boys and girls express this differently, and we know traditionally men value touch quite a bit more in adulthood. In childhood, kids just value touch generally. It's a part of attachment, and attachment lends itself to touch. Even children that have had attachment concerns and issues, one of the ways that we really work with them in therapy is we help to really get touch back into their life, because they tend to kind of freeze up or have issues with touch, and that's just more directly related to the outcomes that have happened through their caregivers. So if we can introduce touch in a safe way and in the responsible boundary way, they can have it and feel empowered with it too. So these are just some ways in general. These aren't only teacher ways, okay? But that we want to make sure that we're incorporating touch. And the girls' touch list has some more that you might do when kids are younger, but then you kind of grow out of, like kissing on the forehead. You know, parents, when kids are younger, they tend to kiss their kids more. But as they get older, you kind of don't do it. But you could continue to kiss them on the forehead. That's a nice way to show kids that they're connected. I remember that when I was young, when I said I was sick, my dad would put his face on my forehead, right? And I remember that now, but he only did it when I said I didn't feel good, right? Because for him, he was doing it to see if I had a fever. But for me, that was a really important way that he touched me, and I still remember that was something that he did. So kind of recognizing that, especially in a classroom setting, as girls get older, we tend to touch them less and less out of fear, and it's a legitimate fear. I worked with many girls that have been sexually abused. I ran groups for years and years with girls that are sexually abused from 4 to 6 and 9 to 12. And girls, even after they've been sexually abused, have a really hard time in classrooms with teachers, even just kind of coming up over them. And not even touching, but just the sensation of their space. So it is a legitimate piece, but if at the beginning of the year you're open with parents and saying, hey, I anticipate I will likely touch your child. If that's something you know your child doesn't like, or there's some sort of an issue that I should be aware of, I'd love to know that up front, so I don't do this in a way that could make them uncomfortable. And it's something that I want to be able to talk to them about, what they feel comfortable with too. Another really good one for girls that isn't on the list, but there are teachers sometimes that are really good at like braiding hair, and girls just, they love that. They love that the teacher can do that, and it's something that feels like it's still incorporating touch, and it's very traditional, and it's something that has been culturally significant in many cultures, doing people's hair for forever. So having something like that can be fun too, having like that kind of touch as opposed to just having it be a more direct piece. Any questions? All right. Acts of service. Acts of service is a nice one because this is one we can really easily incorporate into a classroom. Helping out is something kids love to do, and it's something we can find ways that they can do it. We can create jobs for them. We can have them feel like it's their special day to help us out, pass out papers, doing these different things that help them feel like they're helping you. You can also have them feel like they're helping the other kids in the classroom too. It doesn't just have to be that they're helping you. A couple things about active service though in the classroom is that kids make messes, they don't always follow directions, you do things better than they do. So if you're asking them to do something, sometimes you have to redo it, right? Or you need to correct their mistakes around it. And when you have such a limited amount of time in your day, sometimes you just don't want to do that. Sometimes you just say like, oh no, it's easier if I just do this. And that's one of the ways that with acts of service, different teachers have different philosophies on how to incorporate it in their classroom. One of the tools that I've talked about in different trainings, and I know some of you have been in, is that I like to have people use a class pet that's not a real animal. So like a turtle stuffy, or like one of those American Girl doll knockoff horses from Target. Something that as part of the classroom jobs, the child can take care of that pet, and that can be something that they can feel like they're helping and that they're utilizing that skill of acts of service, but it doesn't affect other kids, it doesn't affect the classroom, it's just another way that kids can feel useful, and it's not a real animal or a real plant, or, and another way you can utilize it is if a child is acting out, you could use that pet as a way to say, how would you feel if and you can personalize that pet as opposed to making it about other students. And you can also say if a child needs to decompress or de-escalate, you can say, hey, why don't you go see if Fluffy has enough water, or whatever, whatever they can do to check in. Can you pet Fluffy for a couple minutes? Nobody's giving Fluffy attention. This is a nice way for someone to feel like they're needed, and that they can connect, and that they have worth. And it is traditional in terms of the act of service. The piece about trauma and illness, or reasons to allow for age regression, is that that's common across the board. But sometimes when a child is maybe seeming like, gosh, they're just not doing what they need to do. Maybe I don't want them to help out right now because they're just going to be dysregulated or not contribute. Sometimes that's a time when those kids actually probably need to help the most. So finding ways to help them do that in a way that will feel good to you and them can be helpful to them long term. Like I said, teachers have differing views around how to incorporate acts of service into their classroom. The daily jobs piece is one of the best ways, making sure that it's about the children instead of just the teacher. Providing service to children can be a good way to show that you care about them, and specifically asking a child how you can help them. Most kids aren't going to have a response, right? Like, for the most part, kids aren't going to know what to say. If you say, oh, is there a way that I can help you today? But the kid that maybe does, honoring that can feel really big for them, whatever that request could be. And it could even be just a couple options. More of the love language, the love and logic tactic of like, here are some things I could do for you this afternoon. I'd like you to pick which one we're gonna do. That can be really empowering for that child too. And setting up strong traditions and rituals as a class. Kids know. 3 years ago, my sister went to Miller Farms with this class, right? Kids know that. So having those traditions, even year in, year out, can be very valuable for kids. Not just necessarily in the course of the year, but having things that kids know that if they're in your class, that they get to do. That's a really nice thing for them. And, siblings are always saying like, oh, you get to do such and such next year, and that feels good to them. And that's part of the active service piece. That teacher valued us enough to have this ritual that they do year in, year out in the classroom. Finally, the big thing that I think most people who work with kids know is that each day is a new day, right? You start over with kids. Your attention, your care is unconditional in this classroom. They have to feel like every day is new, just like it is with your own kids. You have to be able to reset. You can't let resentment build and build and build towards certain kids, and that can be very challenging with these kids who need that extra support. Making sure that you utilize eye contact and body language with kids, just in general, is a nice way of doing that physical connection. And one of the safest ways for you to be able to do the physical touch component for kids is having that. Having little mini dance parties and some type of movement is always a nice way to do that. Kids love that. Kids really love for words of affirmation, having a specific chant or song or a way that they recognize that you begin the day or end the day, a little phrase or something that they say or yell or whatever is a nice way to connect your classroom with the words of affirmation. Remember how accepting you were in the early years. So with your own children, when your kids are 5 and under, you just really allow them room to grow. But when you work year in and year out with kids that are 5 years old, you don't necessarily have the same grace that you did maybe when your kids were 4 or 5. So just remembering that and kind of recognizing that each year, they're hitting that same milestone at that time and being available to them in the same way consistently. If you need anything from me, let me know. Otherwise, does anybody have any questions?